Imagine waking up each day feeling trapped inside a mind that never stops racing, a relentless storm of thoughts swirling, crashing, and tearing at the edges of your sanity. Eduardo, at 72, knows this storm all too well. His world, once filled with the warmth of shared laughter and quiet companionship, has shrunk into a cold, unyielding prison of solitude and suspicion. The walls of this prison are built not from bricks or iron, but from memories twisted by betrayal and a ceaseless overthinking that suffocates his very soul. He lost his wife not just to death, but to a secret that gnaws at him like a persistent shadow, an old betrayal uncovered too late. The revelation is a knife twisting deep into his heart. She, the woman he loved and trusted for decades, had been unfaithful in a past he never knew. The betrayal is not just about the act, but about the shattered narrative of his life. Was I not enough? He asks himself in the silent hours of the night, over and over, as if seeking a cruel truth that might finally explain everything. The echo of that question reverberates through his mind, fueling an endless loop of doubts and regrets. In the quiet confines of his home, Eduardo's days bleed into one another, a monotony punctuated by the ritual of solitude. Friends call, but their voices fade into distant echoes as he declines invitations, retreating further into the sanctuary of his own thoughts. The phone sits silent on the table, a symbol of his self-imposed exile. His physical world narrows to the four walls that contain him, but his mental world expands indefinitely, a labyrinth of what-ifs and if-onlys that trap him in a relentless mental chase. The overthinking is a cruel taskmaster. Every memory is dissected, every conversation replayed in his mind with surgical precision, searching for hidden meanings and missed signs. The mind's natural tendency to seek patterns becomes a tormentor, weaving a tapestry of imagined failures and self-recriminations. The cognitive burden weighs heavily on Eduardo's spirit, draining his energy and dimming the light of hope. His thoughts become a maze without an exit, each turn leading deeper into despair. This mental imprisonment is compounded by the physical toll of his coping mechanisms. In an attempt to quiet the relentless noise within, Eduardo turns to medication, pills that promise relief but often deliver numbness instead. The bottle by his bedside grows emptier, a silent testament to his struggle to escape the clutches of his own mind. Yet, the relief is fleeting, and the shadows return with greater intensity once the drugs wear off. The pills are both a balm and a chain, offering momentary peace but reinforcing his dependence on external crutches. Betrayal, overthinking, and solitude form a triad that isolates Eduardo from the world and from himself. The pain of loss becomes entangled with the pain of doubt, creating a toxic brew that threatens to consume his identity. The man who once stood confidently before a classroom full of eager minds now finds himself a prisoner of his own history, unable to move beyond the narratives that haunt him. His sense of self erodes under the weight of questions he cannot answer and wounds that refuse to heal. Yet within this darkness, a paradox emerges. The very act of overthinking, though destructive, reveals a deep yearning for understanding and meaning. Eduardo's mind seeks not just to ruminate, but to make sense of the chaos that life has thrust upon him. This hunger for clarity is a seed of potential transformation, waiting to be nurtured. But before that seed can sprout, the walls of his mental prison must be recognized, understood, and challenged. What if the answers Eduardo seeks are not in the past he obsesses over, but in a radical reimagining of how he relates to his pain and his memories? What if the liberation from overthinking lies not in silencing the mind, but in embracing truths that transcend his current suffering? These questions linger in the air, heavy with possibility, inviting us to journey deeper into the hidden mechanics of Eduardo's struggle. They beckon us toward a confrontation with the psychological and philosophical roots that bind him, a confrontation that promises to illuminate the path from torment to freedom. As we prepare to follow Eduardo's journey beyond this mental labyrinth, we glimpse the first glimmers of hope, a discovery that challenges everything he thought he knew about pain, loss, and the human spirit. The next chapter awaits, where ancient wisdom and bold truths converge to shatter the chains of overthinking and transform despair into resilience. Stay with us and witness how the shadows of Eduardo's mind begin to give way to the light of profound understanding and renewal. If you find yourself caught in a similar storm of thoughts or know someone who is, don't hesitate to join us on this journey. Subscribe, leave a like, and become part of a community that seeks not just to survive, but to thrive in the face of life's greatest challenges. Your story matters here. Imagine Eduardo stepping into the hushed sanctuary of the public library, a place where time seems to slow, and the rustling pages whisper promises of forgotten wisdom. At 72, worn by grief and tangled thoughts, he wanders past rows of books like a man searching for a lifeline in a sea of silence. His fingers brush against spines, each title a potential spark, until one volume calls to him with an inexplicable pull, a dog-eared copy of Nietzsche's works. The name alone evokes a quiet storm within him, a philosopher known for confronting life's darkest questions without flinching. Could this book offer a path through his labyrinth of pain and doubt? As Eduardo opens the fragile pages, he encounters not just words, but a mirror reflecting his own inner turmoil. Nietzsche's voice, raw and unyielding, speaks of truths that defy the comforting narratives Eduardo has clung to. The first truth that strikes him is Amor Fati, the love of fate. At first, the phrase feels like a cruel jest. How could one love the pain that has shattered his world? Yet, as he reads deeper, a profound paradox unfolds. To accept suffering not as a punishment or failure, but as an essential thread in the fabric of life. What if my pain is not a sentence, but a call to embrace my fate fully? Eduardo wonders. This idea unsettles him, challenging years of resistance against the shadows that haunt him. The library's quietude becomes a crucible, where Eduardo's old beliefs begin to melt away. The second truth Nietzsche reveals is the will to power, not as domination over others, but as a personal force to act despite fear and despair. Eduardo, who has lived in the shadow of his wife's betrayal and the numbing haze of medication, feels a stirring within, a flicker of courage that dares to confront the tomb of his loss directly. The idea that power lies in choosing to act, to assert life's meaning even when it trembles on the edge of hopelessness, resonates deeply. Can I find strength in this will to forgive, to reclaim my life? He asks himself. The thought is both terrifying and liberating. Finally, Nietzsche's challenge to go beyond good and evil shakes Eduardo's foundation. It is an invitation to create his own values, to break free from the chains imposed by others, especially the toxic grip of his son, who manipulates him under the guise of care. Eduardo recognizes how he has been living according to a script written by betrayal and control, his identity fragmented by the expectations and judgments of those around him. The philosopher's call to reject binary moralities, to forge an authentic path defined by personal truth, ignites a quiet rebellion in Eduardo's heart. Could he finally sever these ties, reclaim his autonomy, and rebuild his world on his own terms? As the afternoon light filters through the library's windows, Eduardo closes the book with a newfound resolve. These three truths are not mere ideas, but lifelines thrown into the stormy sea of his mind. Each one challenges the overthinking that once imprisoned him. To embrace his fate with love rather than bitterness, to act courageously in spite of fear, and to define his own values free from manipulation. The weight of endless questions begins to lighten, replaced by a fragile but growing hope. With these insights stirring inside, Eduardo feels the first tremors of transformation. The path ahead is uncertain, but no longer does he stand frozen in his mental cage. Instead, he senses the possibility of freedom, not from pain itself, but from the relentless torment of overthinking that has made him a prisoner. The library, once a place of quiet refuge, now becomes the gateway to a new chapter in his life. What will it take for Eduardo to step fully into this new existence? How will he confront the tangible shadows of his past, the grave, the sun's control, the bottles of pills, and embody these truths in his daily life? The journey from knowing to becoming is the crucible where real change unfolds. As we follow Eduardo beyond the pages of Nietzsche, we prepare to witness the courage it demands to act, forgive, and rebuild. If you find yourself wrestling with similar storms of thought or the weight of past wounds, stay with us. Together, we will explore how these ancient truths can be lived, not just understood, lighting a path from despair to resilience. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like to join a community committed to transformation at every age. Your story, like Eduardo's, is waiting to unfold. Imagine Eduardo sitting quietly by the window, the light of a fading afternoon casting long shadows across the worn pages of Nietzsche's book. The phrase, Amor Fati, lingers on his lips like a foreign melody, love of fate. At first, it sounds impossible, almost cruel. How could he, a man shattered by loss and betrayal, be expected to love the very pain that has dismantled his world? The ache in his chest tightens as memories flood back. The warmth of his wife's smile, now forever tainted by the secret she kept. The sharp sting of solitude, a silence so loud it deafens. The bitter echo of, I was not enough. Yet here, in this quiet room, a seed of something strange and unspoken begins to take root. To embrace Amor Fati is not to glorify suffering or deny the wounds carved deep into his soul. It is something far more radical. It is to see pain not as a failure or a punishment, but as an essential thread woven into the fabric of his life's tapestry. Nietzsche's words challenge Eduardo's entire understanding of his grief. What if the suffering, the betrayal, the loneliness, they are not curses, but necessary parts of a path that leads to growth, to a fuller, more authentic existence? What if loving his fate means accepting the darkness as much as the light, the brokenness as much as the wholeness? This idea unsettles Eduardo. His mind, so accustomed to overthinking every detail, rebels against such acceptance. How can I love what I wish never happened? He wonders. But the more he turns the concept over, the more he glimpses a profound truth. The resistance to pain only tightens the chains of his mental prison. The more he fights his fate, the deeper he sinks into despair. Amor Fati whispers a different way, an embrace of reality, not as he wishes it, but as it is. The paradox is striking. Surrendering to fate is not defeat, but a form of strength, a radical acceptance that frees the spirit. Eduardo thinks of his wife, of the years they shared and the secrets that fractured their bond. He recalls the nights spent tossing in bed, haunted by what-ifs and bitter questions. The betrayal seemed to define him, to mark him as insufficient, unworthy of love. But Amor Fati invites a new perspective, to see that life's twists, no matter how painful, are not indictments, but invitations to deeper understanding. They shape who he is, but they do not imprison him unless he chooses to remain captive. This acceptance does not come all at once. It arrives in moments, a breath held and released, a tear shed without shame, a thought allowed without judgment. Eduardo begins to notice small shifts, a quiet calm replacing the storm of overthinking, a softening in the grip of despair. The pain remains, but it no longer dominates. It becomes part of a larger story, a story he still has the power to write. In embracing Amor Fati, Eduardo also confronts a fundamental human fear, that suffering is a sign of failure, that happiness must be free of pain to be genuine. Nietzsche shatters this illusion. Life, with all its chaos and contradiction, demands a love that encompasses every shade of experience. To love one's fate is to say yes to life itself, in its fullness and imperfection. As Eduardo closes the book, a quiet resolve settles over him. The path ahead is not one of easy solace, but of courageous acceptance. He knows the road will be rugged, filled with moments of doubt and sorrow. Yet, for the first time in many years, he feels the stirrings of peace, not a peace born from denial, but from a profound embrace of reality. This newfound acceptance is only the beginning. Amor Fati opens the door to the next truth that Nietzsche offers: the will to power. It beckons Eduardo to move beyond acceptance and into action, to reclaim his life with a force born not of denial but of courage. How will he summon the strength to confront the tangible shadows of his past, the grave of his wife, the pills that numb his pain, the manipulations that threaten his autonomy? The journey from acceptance to empowerment awaits, promising a transformation that will challenge everything he thought he knew about himself. Stay with us as we follow Eduardo's next steps, a bold confrontation with fear and the reclaiming of his will to live fully. If you too find yourself caught in the web of overthinking and sorrow, remember, this journey is not one you walk alone. Subscribe, leave a like, and join a community committed to embracing life's truths and forging paths to freedom. Your story, like Eduardo's, deserves to be heard and healed. Imagine Eduardo standing before his wife's grave, the cold stone a stark contrast to the storm raging inside him. The weight of years spent locked in silent torment presses down, yet beneath it all stirs a fragile ember, a will he had long buried beneath grief, doubt, and despair. Nietzsche's words echo in his mind. The will to power is not about domination over others, but about asserting life's meaning in the face of fear. For Eduardo, this means stepping beyond the paralysis that overthinking has wrought, and choosing to act, to forgive, to reclaim his own narrative. The journey from mental captivity to personal sovereignty is not a sudden leap, but a painstaking awakening. Eduardo's fingers tremble as he reaches out to touch the cold marble, confronting not just the physical reality of loss, but the emotional labyrinth that has kept him prisoner. Here, at this somber threshold, he faces the fear that has shadowed him, the fear of pain, of vulnerability, and perhaps, most painfully, the fear of forgiving a betrayal so deep it fractured his very identity. Yet within this confrontation lies a paradoxical power. The choice to forgive is not a surrender but an act of profound strength. It is the will flexing its muscles, refusing to let the past dictate the terms of his existence any longer. Forgiveness, Eduardo realizes, is not about excusing the wounds inflicted, but about liberating himself from the chains they forged. It is a radical act of self-possession, a declaration that he will no longer be a hostage to bitterness or regret. As he stands in the cemetery, the bitter questions that once consumed him, "Was I not enough?" begin to lose their grip. Forgiving his wife's betrayal does not erase the pain, but it dismantles the fortress of overthinking that turned that pain into a prison. It is a step toward reclaiming his life, a reclaiming of power over his own narrative. Returning home, Eduardo confronts another battleground: the bottles of pills that have become both balm and shackle. Each capsule swallowed was an attempt to mute the relentless noise of his mind, yet they only deepened his sense of disconnection from himself. Armed with a newfound will, he gathers the bottles and throws them away, not in reckless defiance, but in a deliberate act of reclaiming control. This act, small yet monumental, signals a turning point. He chooses to face his pain consciously, to endure the rawness of life rather than anesthetize it. The will to power demands action, and Eduardo answers with courage. Yet the most daunting challenge lies within the walls of his own home, where his son's shadow looms large. The son's manipulations, disguised as care but rooted in control, have chipped away at Eduardo's autonomy, feeding the doubts and insecurities that fuel his overthinking. Nietzsche's third truth beckons him now to move beyond good and evil, beyond imposed judgments, and to forge his own values. This means recognizing the toxic ties that bind him and summoning the strength to sever them. The decision to confront his son is not easy. It shakes the foundation of his familial identity, threatening to unravel decades of unspoken tensions. But Eduardo understands that true freedom demands this painful clarity. He asserts boundaries, reclaiming his financial independence and, with it, a vital piece of his selfhood. This rebellion is not mere defiance, but an authentic expression of the will to power, a declaration that his life will no longer be scripted by others, but authored by his own hand. In this process of facing fear, forgiving, and reclaiming control, Eduardo experiences a profound transformation. The mental cage forged by overthinking begins to crack, allowing light to seep in. The compulsive replaying of past betrayals loses its power, replaced by a resolute presence grounded in action and self-authorship. He discovers that the will to power is not a distant philosophical ideal, but a lived reality, an inner force that enables one to rise from the ashes of despair and claim the right to define one's existence. As Eduardo stands on the threshold of this new chapter, he senses that the journey is far from over. The final truth awaits, a call to transcend old moral binaries and to live by values born from his own soul. It is a challenge to create meaning not as a reaction to pain, but as a proactive embrace of authenticity and freedom. But for now, in the quiet aftermath of confrontation and forgiveness, Eduardo tastes a freedom he has not known in years. The storm of overthinking has not vanished, but its grip has loosened. He is no longer a prisoner, but a warrior of his own will. What will it take for Eduardo to fully embody this final truth? How will he rebuild his world on his own terms, free from the shadows of manipulation and self-doubt? The path is daunting, but the seed of transformation has been planted. Join us as we follow Eduardo's courageous steps beyond the thresholds of fear and forgiveness, into the realm where true autonomy and authenticity await. If you find yourself in the grip of overthinking or trapped by the ghosts of your past, know that this journey is possible and that you are not alone. Subscribe, leave a like, and become part of a community dedicated to reclaiming life's power at every age. Your story deserves to be told. Imagine Eduardo standing at the threshold of a room heavy with memories and shadows, a place where the past has long held dominion over his every thought. The weight of decades presses on him, not just the sorrow of losing his wife, nor the sting of betrayal, but the invisible chains forged by the expectations and judgments of others. At 72, this former professor understands all too well how life's narratives can be written by hands not our own, how the roles imposed on us can become prisons as confining as any physical wall. Yet here, now, a new challenge stirs within him. A call to dismantle these invisible shackles and forge a path beyond the old binaries of good and evil, right and wrong. Nietzsche's final truth, that liberation lies in creating personal values, resonates like a clarion call deep in Eduardo's soul. For so long he has lived according to scripts authored by pain and manipulation, especially the subtle control exerted by his son under the guise of care. Financial decisions, daily routines, even conversations were arenas where Eduardo felt diminished, a shadow of the man he once was. The son's presence, once a source of comfort, had become a toxic tether, feeding Eduardo's doubts and fueling his overthinking with a constant undercurrent of control. But now, armed with the courage born from embracing Amor Fati and asserting his will to power, Eduardo sees a new horizon, freedom through self-authorship. This freedom demands something radical, cutting ties not just with people but with the mental chains of obligation and guilt they wield. Eduardo's heart trembles as he confronts the reality that this rebellion may fracture family bonds, unravel years of unspoken dependencies. Yet, he understands that to continue living under the thumb of manipulation is to betray the very essence of the truths he has embraced. With a steady breath and a clarity born from inner struggle, he sets firm boundaries, reclaiming control over his finances and his life. This act is no mere defiance. It is a profound assertion of his autonomy, a declaration that his life's meaning will no longer be dictated by others, but shaped by his own values. In severing these toxic ties, Eduardo experiences a paradoxical liberation, a shedding of old skins that reveals the raw, authentic self beneath. The prison of overthinking, once fueled by the weight of imposed judgments and distorted loyalties, begins to crumble. He feels the heavy fog lift, replaced by a clarity that is both exhilarating and humbling. The man who once questioned his worth now stands as the architect of his own moral universe, no longer confined by the binary constraints of good and evil handed down by others, but guided by a personal compass forged in the fires of his own experience. But this freedom is not solitude. It blossoms through connection. Eduardo, who once recoiled from friendships and community, now feels a stirring, a yearning to share his journey, to forge bonds rooted in authenticity rather than pretense. Drawing from his newfound wisdom, he creates a walking group for seniors, a sanctuary where stories, struggles, and triumphs intertwine. Here, vulnerability is met with compassion. Overthinking gives way to shared understanding, and the harsh shadows of loneliness are softened by genuine human connection. In teaching resilience through the three transformative truths, Eduardo finds a profound healing, the freedom to be seen, heard, and embraced without masks or fear. This circle of shared humanity becomes a crucible for Eduardo's final transformation. No longer captive to the lies of the past or the silent imprisonment of his mind, he discovers a freedom that transcends circumstance, a liberation rooted in the courage to define his own values, to cut through toxic ties, and to embrace connection as a source of strength. His story is a testament to the power of radical self-authorship, a beacon for anyone trapped in the relentless storm of overthinking and doubt. As the sun sets on Eduardo's old life, a new dawn breaks, one where he is no longer a prisoner but a creator, no longer defined by betrayal but by the authenticity of his own choosing. The journey beyond good and evil is not a destination, but a continuous act of becoming, a dance with life's complexities that demands courage, honesty, and above all, love for oneself and others. To those walking a similar path, Eduardo's story whispers a profound truth. The lies that once bound you hold no power unless you grant it. The freedom you seek lies in the radical act of creating your own values, in severing the chains that no longer serve you, and in opening your heart to connections that heal rather than wound. This is the final truth Nietzsche leaves us, not as a cold philosophy, but as a living, breathing invitation to reclaim your life's narrative. If Eduardo's journey resonates with you, if the storm of overthinking threatens to drown your spirit, know this: transformation is possible at every age. Embrace your fate, assert your will, and step boldly beyond the confines of imposed morality into the vast, liberating expanse of your own becoming. Share your story, connect with others, and together, let us build a community where authenticity and resilience thrive. Your freedom begins now. Join us, subscribe, leave a like, and take your place as the author of your own life's truth.